An emotional story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. A virgin girl of only 17 was forced to marry a cold and soulless billionaire. But before telling this story, subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching us. From continuing. The wind howled through the broken windows of the Montgomery mansion, carrying with it the echo of a long-lost glory. Isabella remained motionless before the oval mirror of her vanity, observing her reflection as if it could offer some answer to the fate that awaited her. Her long, pale fingers slid over the white dress, not a traditional wedding dress, but a simple piece that her mother had insisted she wear for the civil ceremony that would happen in less than 2 hours. 17 years. That was all she had lived until now. 17 winters observing the world through the dusty curtains of this house that had once been the pride of local society. Now, the once majestic corridors displayed peeling wallpaper and crystal chandeliers. Hung precariously from the ceiling, their glass tiers covered with cobwebs. "Isabella!" Eleanor Montgomery's voice cut through the silence like a razor. "Are you ready yet?" She didn't respond immediately. Her eyes, of a deep green that seemed to hold yet undiscovered secrets, fixed on the closed door. She knew that, on the other side, her mother waited, impatient as always, carrying on her shoulders the weight of a name that now meant nothing but debts and shame. "Almost, Mother," she finally answered, her voice barely above a whisper. The sound of Eleanor's heels echoed, down the corridor, moving away. Isabella turned her attention to the crumpled letter on her vanity, the last correspondence from creditors, threatening to take everything that remained. That was why she was here, wasn't it? Why her mother had arranged this hasty marriage with a man Isabella had never met personally, Drake Blackwood. The name sounded like an omen in her mind. 30 years older, they said. Owner of a pharmaceutical empire that spanned 3 continents. A man who, according to the few newspaper clippings she had managed to find, never smiled in photographs. His grey eyes seemed to pierce the soul even through the yellowed newsprint. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she murmured, knowing it could only be Martha, the old housekeeper who had practically raised her. "My child." Martha entered, her eyes already tearful. In her trembling hands, she carried a small carved wooden box. "I found this in the attic. It belonged to your grandmother." Isabella accepted the box carefully, feeling the ancient wood beneath her fingers. Inside, a delicate pearl necklace rested on faded velvet. Next to it, a yellowed note she had never seen before. "He asked specifically for you," Martha said, breaking the silence while helping Isabella put on the necklace. "Mr. Blackwood. He refused all other marriage proposals he received in recent years. Why you, my child? Why now?" The question hung in the air like smoke, dense and suffocating. Isabella felt a shiver run down her spine. It wasn't the first time. She had asked herself this. Why her? Why would such a powerful man choose a 17-year-old girl from a bankrupt family? "Mother said it was because of the family name," she responded mechanically, repeating the explanation that Eleanor had hammered into her head in recent weeks. She said the Blackwoods value tradition above all else. Martha softly snorted, a sound that carried decades of disbelief. "Your mother always had the gift of telling only half the truth, my dear." Before Isabella could question the meaning of those words, Eleanor burst into the room. Her eyes, so similar to her daughter's but infinitely harder, swept the room with military precision. "The car has arrived," she announced, her voice allowing no questions. "He's waiting at the courthouse." Isabella stood up, her legs trembling slightly under the simple dress. In the mirror, her reflection seemed like an unfinished painting, half child, half woman, completely lost. The pearl necklace shone softly, against her fair skin like frozen tears. "Mother," her voice came out firmer than she expected. "Why did he never want to meet me before? Why was this whole agreement made through lawyers and letters?" Eleanor stopped at the door, her posture as rigid as an ice statue. For a moment, something like guilt crossed her face, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "Some questions are better not asked, Isabella. Some answers are better not known. The journey to the courthouse was made in sepulchral silence. Through the car window, Isabella observed her hometown passing like a black and white film. In less than 24 hours, she would be on a plane to Boston, where Drake maintained his main residence. A new life awaited, as cold and unknown as the groom himself. The courthouse was an old building in the center of town, its stone walls emanating an aura of permanence that made Isabella's stomach twist. At the entrance, a tall, thin man awaited them. Not Drake, but his lawyer, Mr. Lawrence, who had conducted all the marriage negotiations. "Miss Montgomery," he greeted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Blackwood is waiting on the second floor." Each step of the staircase seemed heavier than the previous one. Isabella felt the weight of the pearl necklace on her neck, as if it were a chain. When they finally reached the designated room, her heart was beating so hard that she was sure everyone could hear it. The door opened, and there he was. Drake Blackwood was taller than he appeared in photographs, his presence filling the room like a living shadow. He wore an impeccable black suit that seemed to absorb the light around him, but it was his eyes that captured Isabella, not just grey as in the photos, but an almost supernatural silver fixed on her with an intensity that made her stop breathing. For a moment, something passed through those eyes, something that seemed horribly close to pain. But before Isabella could process what she had seen, Drake moved, and the expression disappeared beneath a mask of studied indifference. "Miss Montgomery." His voice was deep and controlled, with a slight Boston accent. "Welcome." When he extended his hand to greet her, Isabella noticed something strange. His fingers trembled slightly, and there was something else, something that made her blood freeze in her veins. When their eyes met, again, she had the inexplicable certainty that those eyes knew her, not just from the present moment, but from somewhere in the past, from some secret buried so deep that not even she knew what it was. The notary cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "Shall we begin?" But before anyone could answer, the door to the room opened violently. An elderly woman, elegantly dressed despite her advanced age, burst into the room. Her eyes, as grey as Drake's, swept the room until they found Isabella. "My God," she whispered, her face losing all color. "It's impossible. She has returned." Drake moved with surprising speed, positioning himself between Isabella and the newcomer. "Mother," his voice had a warning tone that made everyone in the room stiffen. "You shouldn't be here." The woman, his mother apparently, ignored the warning. Her eyes remained fixed on Isabella, now shining with unshed tears. "You can't do this, Drake. Not again, not with her." Again. Isabella felt the world spin slightly under her feet. What did that woman mean by again? And why did she look at her as if she were seeing a ghost? Eleanor Montgomery stepped forward, her face a mask of false concern. "Mrs. Blackwood, what a pleasant surprise. We weren't expecting—" "Silence!" The order came like a whip. The old lady drew herself up to her full height, her eyes now flashing with fury. "You," she pointed to Eleanor, "you knew. From the beginning, you knew." "Enough." Drake's voice cut through the air like ice. "Mr. Lawrence, please escort my mother to the car." "No?" Mrs. Blackwood resisted when the lawyer tried to guide her out. "Drake, look at her. Really look. She's just like... My God, she's exactly like..." "Enough!" Drake's shout reverberated. Off the walls, everyone froze. In her almost 18 years of life, Isabella had never felt so afraid, not of the shout itself, but of the desperation she heard behind it. When Mrs. Blackwood was finally removed from the room, a heavy silence fell over everyone. Isabella looked at her mother, seeking some explanation, but Eleanor kept her eyes fixed on the floor, her lips a thin, pale line. The notary cleared his throat again, clearly uncomfortable. Should we proceed?" Drake turned slowly, his eyes meeting Isabella's. For a moment she saw something in that look, a silent plea, an old pain, a secret that seemed about to suffocate him. Then, as if a curtain had been closed, all emotion disappeared. "Yes," he replied, his voice controlled again. "Proceed." But as the notary began to read the documents, Isabella couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Blackwood's words. "Not again," she had said. "Not with her." What exactly was happening? Who was the person she supposedly resembled so much? And why did she have the terrible feeling that she was about to sign not just a marriage contract, but her own sentence? The Blackwood mansion rose against the Boston sky like a fortress of glass and steel, its mirrored walls reflecting the Massachusetts twilight in tones of blood and gold. Isabella observed the construction through the car window as it wound along the private road, feeling increasingly smaller before the magnitude of what awaited her. The last 24 hours had been a blur of events. The silent signing of the marriage papers, the private flight to Boston where Drake had remained in his private cabin during the entire journey, and now this, her arrival at what would be her new home. If she could call a place that seemed more like a luxury prison a home. "Your things have already been taken to your quarters," Drake's voice sounded for the first time since they had entered the car. "Mrs. Wilson, the housekeeper, will show you the way." "Your quarters, not ours." Isabella swallowed hard, but kept her chin up. Throughout the marriage process, she had promised herself that she would not show fear, no matter what happened. The car stopped before a black marble staircase. A small army of staff waited in perfect formation, all dressed in impeccable uniforms. At their front, a middle-aged woman with grey hair pulled back in a severe bun. Mrs. Wilson, Isabella presumed. "Welcome, Mrs. Blackwood," the housekeeper greeted her with a slight New England accent, but her eyes contained something beyond mere professional cordiality. Pity? Concern? Drake disappeared into the house without looking back, leaving Isabella in the care of the housekeeper. As she was guided through endless corridors, each more austere than the last, the young woman couldn't help but notice how the staff avoided her gaze. There was something in the air, a palpable tension that went beyond the natural discomfort with a new mistress. "Your quarters are in the East Wing," explained Mrs. Wilson as they climbed to the second floor. "The master was quite specific about your accommodation." The East Wing. Isabella made a mental note. "And where are my husband's quarters?" The word still sounded strange on her tongue. A moment of hesitation. "The master occupies the West Wing. It's more convenient for his work." Convenient, of course. Everything in that house seemed to have been designed to maintain distance. Between people, between feelings, between the unspoken truths that hung in the air like ghosts. The quarters turned out to be practically a complete apartment. Living, room, study, master bedroom with closet and bathroom, all decorated in ice blue and grey tones. Elegant but impersonal. As if it had been prepared to receive not a person, but an idea of a person. "Dinner is served at 8 o'clock sharp in the main hall," informed Mrs. Wilson. "The master, well, he rarely dines at home, but requests your presence anyway, to keep up appearances." Appearances? Isabella almost laughed. What else was this marriage but an elaborate performance of appearances? "Mrs. Wilson," she called before the housekeeper could leave, "are there other wings in the house besides the East and West?" The woman stiffened almost imperceptibly. "There is the North Wing, but it has been closed for years. No one has permission to enter there. Master's orders." "Why?" "Some questions are better not asked, madam." The same words her mother had used the day before. "If you'll excuse me, I need to supervise dinner." Alone, Isabella began to explore her quarters more thoroughly. Her belongings, the few she had brought from the Montgomery mansion, had already been organized in the immense closet. But something caught her attention. Several pieces of clothing she didn't recognize, all new, all in her exact size. In the study, a bookshelf filled with books covered an entire wall. Approaching, she noticed that many were rare first editions of literary classics. Her fingers ran along the spines until they stopped at a specific volume, Jane Eyre, her favorite story. How could he know? It was then that she noticed some of the books seemed slightly misaligned, as if they had been moved recently. She pulled one of them out at random, and something fell. An old photograph, its edges yellowed by time. Her heart stopped. In the eye, photo. A young woman smiled at the camera. She wore clothes from the 40s or 50s, But that wasn't what made Isabella sit down abruptly in the nearest armchair. It was the woman's face. It was like looking at a mirror through time. The same green eyes, the same face shape, even the smile had the same soft curve. On the back of the photo, a single line in elegant calligraphy. Sarah, 1952. Sarah. The name echoed in her mind, bringing with it Mrs. Blackwood's words at the courthouse. She's just like... A sound at the door made her hastily put the photo back in the book. Drake was standing at the entrance to the study, his tall figure casting a long shadow on the carpet. "I see you found the library," his voice was controlled, but there was an underlying tension that wasn't there before. His eyes swept the bookshelf as if looking for something out of place. "They're wonderful books," Isabella replied, keeping her voice firm, "especially the first editions of Bronte." Something flickered across his face. "You... like Jane Eyre?" "It's my favorite book." Drake took a step back as if he had taken a physical blow. For a moment it seemed he was going to say something more, but then his face returned to its habitual mask of indifference. "Dinner will be served in an hour," he announced, turning to leave. But he stopped at the door without turning around. "And Isabella, the north wing is forbidden. Do not go near it under any circumstances." After he left, Isabella allowed herself to tremble. Not from fear, she realized with surprise, but from a strange excitement, because now she was certain there was a mystery in that house, a mystery that somehow was connected to her. As she prepared for dinner, a succession of questions hammered in her mind. Who was Sarah? Why did she look so much like her? And what was in the north wing that needed to be kept so secret? The reflection in the mirror as she got ready seemed different now. It was no longer just Isabella Montgomery, the girl sold in a marriage arrangement. It was someone who carried in her face a history that others wanted to keep buried. She went down to dinner at exactly 8, wearing one of the new dresses she had found in the closet, a midnight blue model that seemed to have been made to measure for her. The dining room was immense, with a table that could easily accommodate 30 people, but only 2 places were set at opposite ends. Drake was already there, standing by the window that looked out onto the gardens now plunged into darkness. When he turned to look at her, Isabella saw his eyes widen slightly. "That dress," he began, but stopped abruptly. "Is it not appropriate?" she asked, although she knew his reaction had nothing to do with appropriateness. It's perfect," he replied, after a painful pause. "Sarah chose it." The words escaped before he could contain them. For a moment, the air between them seemed to freeze. Then, as if realizing his mistake, Drake moved abruptly to his chair. "Sit down," he ordered, his voice cold again. "Dinner is served." But it was too late. The name had been said, the connection had been made. And as the servants served the first course in sepulchral silence, Isabella knew she would not rest until she discovered the truth about the woman in the photograph and about why Drake Blackwood had really chosen to marry someone who was her mirror image across the decades. The weeks dragged on in the Blackwood mansion like lazy shadows. Isabella quickly learned the silent language of the house, the specific creak of the floorboard that announced Drake's approach, the whispering of the servants that ceased as soon as she entered a room, the way certain doors remained eternally closed, guarding secrets that no one dared mention. Her husband, the word still sounded strange even after a month, was a ghostly presence. He appeared and disappeared like smoke, always maintaining a calculated distance. But Isabella began to notice the small breaches in his armor, the lingering looks when he thought she wasn't watching, the way his fingers sometimes trembled slightly when she passed too close, the way he seemed to know each of her habits before she even revealed them. It was on one of those particularly cold winter nights that everything began to change. Isabella couldn't sleep, haunted by the photograph of Sarah she had found weeks ago. She decided to go down to the library, her favorite refuge in the mansion, only to discover she wasn't alone. Drake was there, seated in his usual armchair, a half-empty glass of whiskey in one hand. His eyes, when they rose to meet hers, seemed clouded not just by alcohol but by something deeper. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice softer than normal. "Nightmares," she replied, deciding to be honest. "About a woman who looks like me." The glass in his hand trembled visibly. "Sarah," he said, not a question but a statement laden with pain. "Who was she, Drake?" Isabella approached, taking advantage of this rare moment of vulnerability. "Why do you keep a photo of her hidden among the books? And why does she look so much like me?" For a long moment, only the crackling of the fireplace filled the silence. Then, with a movement that surprised her, Drake stood up and walked to one of the bookshelves. His fingers, normally so firm, trembled as he removed an old book, not the same one where she had found the photo, but a leather-bound diary. "Sarah was my sister," he finally said, his voice almost a whisper. "My twin sister." Isabella felt the world spin slightly. "But how? The photo I found was taken in 1952, yes, not by me, by our father." He opened the diary, revealing more photographs, all of the same young woman at different moments. "Sarah and I were born in 1935. She was pure light. While I drowned myself in numbers and business, she lived in worlds of fantasy and literature. Jane Eyre was her favorite book too." Isabella's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "What happened to her?" "She died. Or at least, that's what the death certificate says." His eyes met hers with a frightening intensity. "In 1952, Sarah disappeared, simply vanished. A week later, a body was found in the property's lake. I was unrecognizable, but it had her necklace, the one she always wore. The same necklace that was in my room when I arrived," Isabella completed, feeling a shiver run down her spine. "The pearl necklace." Drake nodded slowly. "For years I believed it had been an accident, or maybe she had—" He couldn't complete the sentence. "But then 5 years ago I found something. Letters. Dozens of them, hidden in a false wall in the north wing. Letters that proved Sarah was alive long after 1952, that she had run away, and that she was pregnant." The air seemed to be sucked from the room. "Pregnant? By an employee of the house, someone our father would never approve of. She planned everything. Her escape, her fake death, and she succeeded. For years she lived in hiding, raising her daughter far from the Blackwoods." His eyes now shone with something close to fever. "Haven't you ever wondered why your mother never talks about your maternal grandmother, Isabella?" The world stopped. The sound of the fireplace, the tick-tock of the antique clock, everything disappeared before the revelation that unfolded like a poisonous flower. "No," she whispered, taking a step back. "It can't be. Sarah was your grandmother, Isabella. And when I discovered this, when I saw your photo in a local newspaper years ago, next to your mother, Eleanor, I knew I needed to bring you home, bring you back to where Sarah should have been all this time. So that's why." Her voice trembled with anger now. "That's why you bought me? To correct some mistake from the past? To have back a piece of your lost sister?" Drake moved with surprising speed, his hands grabbing her arms with enough force to leave marks. "No, it's not that simple. There's more, much more that you need to know." But before he could continue, a scream cut through the air, sharp, desperate, coming from the north wing. Drake's face lost all color. "Impossible," he murmured. "She can't be here." "Who?" Isabella demanded, but he was already moving toward the door. "Stay here," he ordered over his shoulder. "Don't leave the library, no matter what you hear." But, of course, she didn't obey. As soon as his footsteps disappeared down the corridor, Isabella followed in the same direction. The scream had ceased, but now she could hear raised voices coming from the forbidden wing. One of them, she realized with shock, speaking in rapid, desperate tones. She approached the door that separated the wings silently, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the ancient wood, she could make out fragments of the discussion. "She must know the truth," the female voice demanded. "No," Drake responded, his voice more altered than Isabella had ever heard. "You'll destroy everything. She has the right to know about Sarah, about what really happened that night, about why you really brought her here." Isabella pressed her ear against the door, trying to hear more, but at that moment, the old floor creaked beneath her feet. The voices inside the room abruptly ceased. Before she could move, the door opened violently. Drake was there, his eyes flashing with fury and fear. Behind him, partially hidden in the shadows, Isabella glimpsed a figure that made her blood. Freeze, an elderly woman in a wheelchair, her green eyes, exactly like hers, wide with shock. "Sarah," Isabella whispered, but she knew it was impossible. This woman was too young to be her grandmother. "No," Drake replied, his voice trembling. "This is Victoria, the ex-fiancée that everyone thinks died 15 years ago, and who, apparently, decided to choose the worst possible night to return from the dead." The silence that followed was like a rope stretching to the breaking point. Isabella stared fixedly at Victoria, absorbing every detail of the woman in the wheelchair. Despite the years and whatever had happened to leave her in that condition, it was still possible to see traces of the beauty she must once have possessed. And there was something else in her face, something familiar that went beyond mere physical resemblance. "So this is the new Sarah," Victoria said, her voice carrying a mixture of bitterness and something close to compassion. "Or should I say the new me?" "Enough," Drake thundered, moving to block the view between the two women. "You shouldn't be here. The agreement—" "The agreement?" Victoria laughed, a broken sound that echoed through the empty corridors. "The same kind of agreement you made with her mother. How much did it cost this time, Drake? How much did you pay to have another chance to fix the past?" Isabella felt her legs weaken. She leaned against the nearest wall, her mind spinning with the implications of what she was hearing. "What is she talking about?" "It's nothing," Drake responded too quickly, his voice tense. "Victoria is confused. The medications—" "Confused?" The woman in the wheelchair leaned forward, her green eyes shining, with a feverish intensity. "Tell her, Drake. Tell her how you searched for years for someone who looked like Sarah. How you found me first, transformed me into your personal doll, tried to mold me in the image of your dead sister. And when wasn't enough when I refused to continue with that sick charade, well, accidents happen, don't they?" "Lies!" Drake's shout reverberated off the walls. For a moment he seemed larger, more threatening, like a shadow coming to life. "You know it wasn't like that. You know what really happened that night." "Do I?" Victoria tilted her head, a sad smile playing on her lips. "Because all I remember is being at the top of that staircase, trying to escape after discovering the truth about Sarah, about you, about everything. And then suddenly I was falling. The rest," she gestured to the wheelchair, "well, the rest is history." Isabella felt the world spinning around her. Her legs finally gave way, and she slid down the wall to sit on the floor. "That's why the north wing is forbidden," she murmured, the pieces fitting together like a macabre puzzle. "It was here that it happened. It was here that she fell?" Victoria completed with a bitter laugh. "Or was pushed? 15 years have passed and I'm still not sure, but you are, aren't you, Drake?" His face had become a stone mask, completely unreadable. "You were hysterical that night. You had been drinking, you were raving about conspiracy and murder. I tried to stop you from going up the stairs, but you wouldn't listen to me. What happened afterward was a convenient accident," Victoria cut in. "Like so many other accidents in the history of the Blackwoods. Like Sarah's disappearance, like the mysterious death of Isabella's father." The last sentence hit Isabella like a punch to the stomach. "What?" "My father died in a car accident. Mother always said—" "Your mother says many things, darling." Victoria leaned forward more, her green eyes fixed on Isabella's. "But haven't you ever wondered why Drake chose you specifically? Why he paid so much money to marry a girl barely out of adolescence? It wasn't just for your resemblance to Sarah, although that was a perverse bonus. It was because he feels guilty. Guilty for what happened to your father that night 17 years ago." "Enough!" Drake moved like lightning, grabbing the arms of the wheelchair. "You're leaving now!" But Victoria wasn't finished. As Drake pushed her toward the elevator at the end of the corridor, she continued speaking, her voice echoing off the walls. "Ask him about the night of March 15th, Isabella. Ask what really happened on the road to Boston. Ask why your father was so desperate to reach the Blackwood mansion that night." The elevator doors closed, swallowing Victoria and her voice. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella remained, seated on the floor, trembling. Her mind spun with all the revelations, all the unanswered questions. When she finally found the strength to raise her eyes, she saw Drake standing a few meters away, observing her with an expression she had never seen before, a mixture of fear, guilt, and something terribly close to despair. March 15th, she whispered, the date echoing in her memory like a funeral bell. The day my father died. Drake took a step toward her, but stopped when she instinctively recoiled. Isabella, please. It's not what you're thinking. And what am I thinking? Her voice came out firmer than she expected. That you have some connection to my father's death, that my mother knew this when she sold my hand in marriage, that I'm just another piece in some sick game of substitution that you've been playing for decades. No. He knelt before her, his gray eyes begging for understanding. Yes, I knew your father. Yes, he was coming to meet me that night. But it wasn't. It didn't happen like Victoria is implying. There's more to this story. Much more. Then, tell me, Isabella demanded, fighting against the tears that threatened to fall. Tell me everything, now. For a long moment, Drake just stared at her, as if fighting an internal battle. When he finally spoke, his voice was laden with an emotion she had never heard before. If you know the whole truth, you'll hate me forever. Isn't it a bit late to worry about that? She replied bitterly. He closed his eyes, as if each word physically hurt him. Maybe. But before I tell everything, I need you to see something. Something I've kept for 17 years, waiting for the right moment. Standing up, he extended his hand to help her. Isabella hesitated for a moment, then accepted. His touch, normally so controlled and distant, now burned like ice. Where are we going? She asked when he began to guide her deeper into the north wing. To Sarah's room, he answered, his voice almost a whisper. It's time for you to know the whole truth about your grandmother and about the night your father died, trying to save you. Sarah's room was a perfectly preserved time capsule. When Drake opened the heavy oak door, the air that escaped carried the perfume of half a century of secrets. Isabella entered hesitantly, her eyes taking in every detail of the environment frozen in 1952. The vanity with perfume bottles still half full, a light blue dress hanging on the rack as if waiting for its owner to return, books piled on the bedside table, mostly romantic novels, she observed, including a worn edition of Jane Eyre. Nothing has been touched, Drake said softly, lighting a lamp that cast an amber light over the room, except for one thing. He headed to an ancient tapestry on the farthest wall. With a precise movement, he pulled it to reveal a built-in safe. His fingers trembled slightly as he entered the combination. For years I thought Sarah had died in that lake, he continued, his voice laden with an emotion Isabella had never heard before. But then, 17 years ago, I received this. From May. The safe. He removed a yellowed envelope. The paper was thin, almost translucent with age, and Isabella could see the elegant handwriting through it, the same handwriting she had seen on the back of the photograph. A letter from Sarah, she whispered, her heart accelerating. But you said that she had survived, yes, that she had run away pregnant. But what I didn't tell... He paused as if the words physically hurt him. What I didn't tell you is that she tried to come back. 17 years ago, Sarah finally gathered the courage to face our father and tell the truth, but she arrived too late. Drake extended the letter to Isabella with trembling hands. Read. You need to understand. You need to know why your father was coming to meet me that night. With numb fingers, Isabella opened the envelope. The paper was fragile, the folds so worn they threatened to break. The date at the top made her heart stop. March 15th, 1998, the day of her father's death. My dear brother, she began to read. Aloud, her voice trembling slightly. When you receive this letter, I will already be on my way to Boston. I know it's madness after so long, but I can no longer carry this secret. Father is dying, the newspapers don't lie about that, and before he departs, I need him to know the truth. About me, about my daughter, about the grandson he never knew. Eleanor, grew up without knowing her true history, and perhaps it was better that way. But now she has her own daughter, a girl who was just born, and I cannot bear the thought of another generation growing up without knowing their roots, without knowing who they really are. I told everything to her husband last night. Anthony Montgomery is a good man, Drake. He understood why I kept the secret all these years, why I raised Eleanor, making her believe she was an orphan. He promised to help me tell the truth to everyone, promised to stand by my side when I faced Father. But something went wrong. This morning I received a phone call from him. He was nervous, frightened. He said he had been followed since he left my house, that he thought someone had discovered. He mentioned documents, evidence that Father kept about something terrible. I didn't understand everything, but he insisted on finding you first, said. He needed to show you something before it was too late. If you are reading this, it means he managed to find you. Please, my brother, help him, protect him, and most importantly, protect my granddaughter, little Isabella. I have a terrible feeling that the letter ended abruptly there, as if Sarah had been interrupted. Isabella raised her eyes, her hands trembling so much she could barely hold the paper. My father. Her voice was just a whisper. He was going to meet you to show you something. Something he discovered about your father. What was it, Drake? He had approached the window, his silhouette cut out against the night outside. For a long moment he remained silent, as if gathering courage. Documents, he said finally. Evidence that my father wasn't just the respected industrialist everyone thought. He had connections with certain groups during the war, made a fortune collaborating with... No, Isabella interrupted, feeling nausea. That's not what I'm asking about. What happened to my father that night? Why did he never reach you? Drake turned slowly. In the window's reflection, Isabella could see two versions of him. The marble man she had met at the courthouse, and this new version, devastated by the weight of ancient secrets. Because someone stopped him, he answered with a hoarse voice. Someone who couldn't let the truth come out. Someone who had dedicated decades to building the Blackwood reputation, and who would do anything to protect it. Your father, Isabella whispered, the pieces fitting together like a macabre puzzle. He killed my father. No. Drake closed his eyes as if each word hurt him. My father was bedridden, dying of cancer. He gave the order, yes, but it wasn't him who executed it. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella felt the world spinning around her, her mind refusing to accept the obvious conclusion that was forming. Who? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Who killed my father, Drake? When he opened his eyes again, they were full of unshed tears. I did, he confessed, his voice breaking. I did, he confessed, his voice breaking. And I've spent the last 17 years trying to redeem myself for it. The world seemed to have lost all sound, all color. Isabella stood there, motionless in Sarah's room, staring at the man who had just confessed to murdering her father. Her legs trembled, but she refused to fall, not now, not in front of him. Redeem? Her voice cracked like a whip. Is that what I am to you? A form of redemption? Drake took a step toward her but stopped when she violently backed away. No, yes, it's more complicated than that. Complicated? Isabella laughed, a hysterical sound that even she didn't recognize. You killed my father, you destroyed my family, and then you bought me? As if I were some kind of living penance? I didn't know, he exploded, his mask of control finally cracking completely. I didn't know Anthony was your father when I followed orders that night. I didn't know he was Sarah's son-in-law, that you were... I only discovered afterward when he was already... dead, she completed coldly. When he was already dead by... your hands. Drake staggered as if he had taken a physical blow. When I discovered the truth, it was already too late. I spent years trying to find Sarah, trying to fix what I had done, but she had also disappeared as if she had foreseen. And then you found me, Isabella continued, the pieces fitting together in a grotesque mosaic. Sarah's granddaughter, the daughter of the man you killed. A perfect chance to atone for your sins, isn't it? It wasn't like that. He moved quickly, grabbing her arms before she could move away. His grey eyes were feverish, desperate. In the beginning, yes, it was out of guilt, but afterward what? She tried to free herself, but his grip was too strong. Afterward, you discovered I looked like Sarah, that you could transform me into another one of your dolls like you did with Victoria. No! His shout reverberated off the walls. You don't understand. When I saw you for the first time in that local newspaper, yes, the resemblance to Sarah shocked me, but that wasn't what made me, that wasn't why Why then? Isabella demanded, tears finally escaping from her eyes. Why did you choose me? Why did you bring me to this house of lies? Because I fell in love with you. The confession exploded between them like thunder. Drake released her abruptly, staggering backward as if his own words had wounded him. I fell in love with you before I even met you, he continued, his voice now almost a whisper, through your columns in the local newspaper, through your way of seeing the world, through your soul that overflowed in every word you wrote. The resemblance to Sarah was just a sign that maybe in some distorted way, fate was giving me a chance to fix everything. Isabella felt her legs finally give way. She slid to the floor, her back against the ancient wall. You're sick, she whispered. This is sick. I know. He ran his hands over his face, suddenly looking much older. That's why I kept my distance. That's why I created all these rules, these walls between us. Because I knew I didn't deserve, that I would never deserve. My father, she interrupted, her voice trembling. How did it happen? For a moment it seemed he wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, he sat on the floor too, maintaining a safe distance from her. He was driving to Boston, he began, each word seeming to cause him physical pain. I followed him under my father's orders. When he stopped to change a flat tire, a sabotage I myself had arranged, I approached him. He recognized me, of course. He knew who I was. Isabella closed her eyes, but the tears continued to fall. He tried to convince me to help him, Drake continued, his voice choked. He said he had evidence, not just of my father's war crimes, but of something more recent. Something involving illegal experiments in our pharmaceutical industries. He said we needed to protect Sarah, that she was in danger. And you killed him anyway, Isabella completed, opening her eyes to stare at him. I was a different man that night, he whispered. A man who still believed that family loyalty was above everything, that the Blackwood name needed to be protected at any cost. So yes, I pushed him. The car was already close to the precipice because of the flat tire. It was quick. He didn't. Even stop, Isabella shouted, covering her ears. I don't want to hear any more. I don't want... But something in her mind continued working, connecting dots, revealing a terrible pattern. The experiments, she said suddenly. The illegal experiments that my father discovered, they continued, didn't they? That's why you needed to keep me close, controlled. It wasn't just out of guilt or this supposed sick love. You were afraid I would discover, that I would continue the investigation my father had started. Drake became very still. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, no longer pleading or tormented, but cold as on the day they met. Some secrets, he said slowly, need to remain buried, Isabella. For everyone's good. She stood up abruptly, her legs still trembling, but supported by a new strength, the strength of hatred. Is that a threat? He also stood up, his tall figure casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the entire room. It's a warning. There are things at stake much bigger than the two of us, bigger than vengeance or redemption. You're right, she replied, her voice now dangerously calm. There are bigger things at stake, like justice, like truth. Before he could react, she snatched Sarah's letter from his hands and ran for the door. At the last moment, she turned to face him one last time. You said you fell in love with my words in the newspaper. How ironic. Because now it will be my words that destroy you, Drake Blackwood. Every secret, every crime, every obscure experiment that your family tried to hide. I'm going to expose it all, and this time there will be no one to stop me. With that, she disappeared into the darkness of the corridor, leaving Drake alone in Sarah's room, surrounded by the ghosts of all his sins. The night had transformed into a furious storm, as if the sky itself shared in the turbulence that plagued the Blackwood mansion. Isabella ran through the endless corridors, Sarah's letter pressed against her chest, her footsteps echoing like war drums against the ancient floorboards. Behind her, she could hear Drake's voice calling her name, drawing ever closer. But she wouldn't stop. Not now. Not when she finally had in her hands the proof she needed, not just of the confession of her father's murder, but of the mention of the illegal experiments he had discovered. It was the beginning of the end of the Blackwood Empire, and she would be the executioner. She reached her room breathless, locking the door behind her. Her fingers trembled as she frantically typed on her laptop, attaching photos of the letter to an email addressed to all the major newspapers in America. Years of investigative journalism had taught her to maintain a network of reliable contacts, people who wouldn't be intimidated by the Blackwood name. "Isabella," Drake's voice sounded, from the other side of the door, followed by urgent knocking. "Please, you don't understand the danger. There are things that need to remain hidden." She ignored his pleas, continuing to type. But then something made her stop. A detail in Sarah's letter that she hadn't noticed before, a seemingly innocent phrase that now gained new meaning. Documents about something terrible. Her father had died because of these documents. What exactly had he discovered that was so dangerous? The sound of keys in the lock yanked her from her thoughts. Of course he would have a copy. It was his house, after all. On impulse, Isabella grabbed the laptop and ran to the bathroom, locking herself in again. The bedroom door opened with a crash. "Don't do this." Drake's voice sounded different now, not authoritative or threatening, but genuinely scared. "It's not just about me or my family. If this information comes out, innocent people will die. Like my father died," she shouted back, her hands flying over the keyboard as she finalized the email. "Your father died because he discovered something he should never have discovered," Drake replied, his voice closer now. He was near the bathroom door. "Something that goes far beyond war crimes or pharmaceutical experiments, something that involves governments, intelligence agencies." Isabella paused, her finger hovering over the send button. "What are you talking about?" "The experiments," he continued, his voice now almost a whisper. "They weren't just about medications. They were about modification, genetic alteration, creating perfect soldiers, ideal spies, people who could pass for other people." A shiver ran down Isabella's spine. "What do you mean? Why do you think you look so much like Sarah?" The question came like a punch to the stomach. Why did Victoria also look like her? It's not coincidence, Isabella. It's not natural genetics. "No," she whispered, feeling nausea. "You're lying. You're trying to manipulate me again. Your mother never showed you photos of her pregnant, did she? Never told you details about your birth? Because there are no records, Isabella. Not official ones. You were created in a Blackwood laboratory, using Sarah's DNA as a base." The laptop slipped from her trembling hands, falling to the floor with a dull thud. "No, it can't be. Why do you think I felt so attracted to you?" His voice was choked now. "It wasn't just the physical resemblance. It was because in some distorted way you are Sarah. A version of her recreated in a laboratory, programmed to have the same tastes, the same inclinations. Jane Eyre, the newspaper columns, even your way of smiling. Everything was carefully planned." Isabella felt her legs give way. She slid to the floor, her mind refusing to process what she was hearing. "My mother, Eleanor, she knew." "She's not your biological mother," Drake replied softly. "She's your aunt, Sarah's true daughter. When you were created, she agreed to raise you as her daughter. It was the only way to keep the experiment secret, to protect you from those who wanted to use the technology for even more sinister purposes." Sob escaped Isabella's throat. All her memories, her entire life, now seemed an elaborate lie. "Your father discovered the truth," Drake continued. "He found the project files. He was going to expose everything. And if that happened, you would be hunted, Isabella, studied, dissected. Every intelligence agency in the world would come after you, after the technology that created you." "So, you killed him," she whispered. "To protect me." "To protect the secret," he corrected. "At the time, you were just an experiment to me. Another attempt to recreate Sarah. But then years later, when I saw you in the newspaper, when I read your words, I realized you had become much more. You had developed your own personality, your own choices. You were Sarah, but also your own self. The bathroom door finally opened. Drake was standing there looking as devastated as she felt. His grey eyes were tearful. "That's why I brought you here," he confessed, "not just out of guilt or sick love, but because I knew that sooner or later the truth would come out, and when it did, you would need protection." Isabella raised her eyes to him, seeing him truly for the first time. No longer her father's murderer or the obsessive manipulator, but a man torn between duty and desire, between protecting a terrible secret and protecting the woman he loved. "And now," she asked, her voice trembling, "what happens now?" Before Drake could answer, a sound cut through the night silence, glass breaking somewhere in the mansion, followed by multiple footsteps and muffled voices. His face lost all color. "They found us," he whispered. "Somehow, they discovered." "Who?" Isabella stood up, fear taking hold of her body. "The people who want the technology." He grabbed her hand, pulling her out of the bathroom. "The same ones who killed Sarah when she finally emerged from hiding. The same ones who transformed Victoria into what she is today when she threatened to expose the truth." The sound of footsteps approached, now more distinct. Male voices gave orders in different languages. "We don't have much time," Drake whispered, quickly guiding her through the room. "There's a secret passage behind the library, a tunnel that leads to a shelter in the mountains. It was Sarah's escape plan, but she never managed to use it." "Why should I trust you?" Isabella asked, though she was already following him. The sound of more glass breaking, now closer, didn't leave much room for hesitation. "Because at this moment," he replied, his eyes fixed on hers, "I'm the only chance you have of surviving and discovering the whole truth." They ran through the dark corridors of the mansion, now illuminated only by the occasional lightning of the storm. The sounds of invasion multiplied, footsteps, voices, doors being broken down. Whoever they were many and approaching rapidly. When they reached the library, Drake locked the heavy door behind them and ran to one of the bookshelves. His fingers found a hidden mechanism, and with a soft click, the entire shelf moved to reveal a narrow passage. "Go," he ordered, gently pushing her toward the opening. "The tunnel will take you directly to—" A deafening crash interrupted him. The library door shuddered on its hinges. Someone was trying to break it down. "Come with me," Isabella found herself saying, surprising herself. Despite everything she had discovered, despite the hatred and betrayal, something inside her refused to leave him behind. Drake smiled sadly. "I can't. I need to stay and delay them. I need to buy time for you to escape." "But, Isabella," he held her face between his hands, his grey eyes shining with an intensity she had never seen before. "You are more than an experiment, more than a copy of Sarah. You're the most real person I've ever known, and that's why I need to protect you. Not out of guilt, not out of obsession, but because—" The door exploded before he could finish. In the next instant, the library was invaded by masked men in black tactical gear. Drake pushed Isabella into the passage and activated the closing mechanism. The last thing she saw before the bookshelf slid back into place was Drake turning to face the invaders, a gun appearing in his hand as if by magic. The sound of the first shots echoed through the dark passage as Isabella began to run. The darkness of the tunnel engulfed Isabella as she ran, guided only by instinct and the distant sound of gunshots. Still echoing from the mansion, her hands slid along the damp walls, her heart beating in the same frantic rhythm as her footsteps. Each explosion she heard made her hesitate. Was Drake still alive? Why did she care? After everything she had discovered, the truth about her own existence weighed on her chest like molten lead. An experiment, a copy, an attempt to recreate someone who had died decades before she was born, or rather, before she was created in a laboratory. The tunnel seemed endless, winding through the mountain like a stone snake. From time to time, Small emergency lights marked the path, their weak glow creating distorted shadows on the ancient walls. How many times had Sarah planned to use this escape route? Had she also run through this same tunnel decades ago, carrying not just her own life, but the life of the child growing in her womb, the real Eleanor? A different sound made her stop abruptly, running water. The tunnel had widened and now she could hear the roar of an underground waterfall. The light was stronger here, coming from a natural opening in the rock above. Through it, the storm still raged, but the fresh air entering was a relief after the claustrophobic atmosphere of the tunnel. It was then that she heard it, footsteps, not behind her, from where she had come, but ahead. Someone was waiting for her. "Don't be afraid." A familiar voice sounded from the darkness. "I won't hurt you." Victoria emerged from the shadows, still in her wheelchair, but there was something different about her now, a strength, a presence that wasn't there before. "How?" Isabella began, but the answer came even before she could complete the question. "I know these tunnels better than anyone," Victoria replied, a sad smile on her lips. "This is where I hid after the accident. This is where I learned the truth about what we really are." "We?" Isabella took a step back. "You too." "I'm like you," Victoria confirmed. "Another attempt to recreate Sarah. But unlike you, I failed. The process wasn't perfect. My body began to deteriorate, my legs stopped working. I was the prototype that went wrong." A thunderclap shook the cave, causing small stones to fall from the ceiling. In the distance, the sounds of gunshots had ceased. The silence that followed was deafening. "Drake," Isabella whispered, surprised by the pain she felt at the thought of him. "He's alive," Victoria assured. "He always survives. It's what he was trained to do, after all. The perfect son, the perfect soldier, the guardian of the family's secrets." "Why are you telling me this? Why are you here?" Victoria moved her wheelchair closer, her eyes so similar to Isabella's to Sarah's, shining with a feverish intensity. "Because you need to understand that you have a choice," she said softly. "You can run, start a new life far away from all this, or you can stay and fight. Do what Sarah tried to do so many years ago, expose the truth no matter the cost." "And die like she died?" Isabella asked bitterly. "Sarah didn't die," Victoria smiled. "At least not the way you think." Before Isabella could process what that meant, a new sound echoed through the tunnel, footsteps, many of them approaching. Rapidly. "We don't have much time," Victoria said urgently, taking an envelope from inside her coat. "Here is everything you need to know. About the project that created you, about where to find Sarah, about how to end all of this. The choice is yours." Isabella took the envelope with trembling hands. "Why are you helping me?" "Because you're different," Victoria replied, already retreating into the shadows. "You're what Sarah hoped we would be. Not just a copy, but someone capable of making her own choices, of loving on her own account." She paused, an enigmatic smile on her lips. "Even if that love is for someone as unlikely as Drake Blackwood." The SOULLESS. Footsteps were closer now. Isabella could hear voices, orders being given in various languages. "Go," Victoria ordered. "There's an exit 50 meters ahead. It will take you directly to the forest. A car is waiting. The keys are in the envelope." "And you?" "I'll be fine," she smiled. "I have my own battles to fight." Isabella hesitated for only a moment before starting to run again. When she looked back one last time, Victoria had already disappeared into the shadows, as if she had never been there. The rest of the tunnel passed in a blur. When she finally emerged into the forest, the storm had eased, leaving only a fine drizzle in its place. The sky was beginning to brighten on the horizon, not yet sunrise, but its promise. She found the car exactly where Victoria had said it would be. Inside the envelope, besides the keys, there were documents, photos, coordinates, and a letter written in a handwriting she immediately recognized, the same as the old photo, the same as Sarah's. Her hands trembled as she opened the paper. The first words made her heart stop. "My dear Isabella, if you are reading this, you have finally discovered the truth about who you are, and about who you can become. Do not allow the way you were created to define who you are. Your choices, your loves, your fears and hopes, they are all yours, true and unique. Come find me when you're ready. There is much more you need to know, much more you need to understand. About you, about Drake, about the true purpose behind your creation. And remember, sometimes the truest love is born from the deepest lies. Don't let fear of what you are prevent you from loving who your heart has chosen. With all my love, Sarah. Isabella closed her eyes, feeling the weight of all the revelations, of all the choices she would need to make. When she opened them again, a new determination had been born in her gaze. She started the car and began to drive, leaving the Blackwood mansion behind. But she wasn't running, not anymore. She was just beginning her true journey. Because now, she knew, she wasn't just a copy, an experiment, an attempt to recreate the past. She was something entirely new, a bridge between what was and what could be. And she had a choice to make: continue Sarah's story or write her own. The sun finally began to rise, painting the sky pink and gold. And somewhere, amid the secrets and lies, one truth remained undeniable. Her heart, artificial or not, had chosen to love. Now she needed to discover if that love would be strong enough to survive the storms that were still to come. Because this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning.